Where do yokai come from? How long have they been among us? Immerse yourself in Kegare, a sci-fi horror odyssey where ancient folklore meets modern bow horror. It is a harrowing commingling of visceral creature features and existential dread. If you dare. Warning. Disturbing imagery descriptives. There are 3 ways to support the abyss. 1. Own the lore. Explore the official collections and other dark aesthetics at GDHorror.com or donate to the process at one of the links provided in the description. 2. Subscribe. Never miss an escape into horror. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest narrations. And 3. Join the circle. Share this journey with other like-minded souls who appreciate the dark, the occult, morbid creatures, and other creations that arise from the abyss. Now, let's descend. Kegare by Xasm. Chapter 1. The Road Before the Stone. The monk found the stone before the stone found him. It sat half buried in the mud beside the Kiso road, unremarkable, except for its warmth, and the way it hummed against his sandal like a struck bell long after his foot had passed over it. Brother Tetsuya turned back. The cedar forest pressed close on both sides of the road, indifferent and dark, exhaling the cold patience of very old trees. Somewhere above the canopy, a hawk screamed and fell silent. The afternoon light came down in columns through the mist, thin and ecclesiastical, illuminating nothing useful. The stone was the color of a dead eye, smooth as something that had never been rough, not river smooth, not worn by weather, but smooth in the way of things that emerged from some process that had nothing to do with time or friction, carved into its surface. If carving was even the word, if the marks had been made from outside rather than grown from within, were characters that did not belong to any dynasty, any province, any tradition Tetsuya had encountered in 30 years of manuscript study. They did not resemble Chinese characters, nor Sanskrit, nor the older pictographic forms preserved in the mountain monasteries. They resembled, most uncomfortably, wounds. He picked it up. It filled his palm with a heat that was almost biological, the specific warmth of another person's held breath. He should have put it down. He pocketed it instead. The hawk did not scream again. The forest did not move. The road continued in both directions as roads do, indifferent to the small catastrophes committed upon them. By nightfall, the hunger started. Chapter 2. What hunger means. Not for food. Tetsuya had fasted longer than this. 40 days in the mountain retreat above Nagano, surviving on water and the thin discipline of sustained prayer. He knew the particular hollowness of chosen starvation, knew how the body first protested and then quieted into something like austere acceptance. This was not that. This was a hunger of the skin, as though every pore had developed a small, desperate mouth, as though his surface was trying to become interior. He scratched until his forearms wept thin lines of blood that dried too quickly, dried in seconds, which he noticed and set aside, because the alternative was to understand what it meant. The other monks at the way station slept around the fire in their arrangements of peaceful breath, undisturbed, while Tetsuya sat rigid in the corner against the wall, pressing the warm stone against his sternum the way a sick child presses a compress, feeling it pulse in time with something that was not quite his heartbeat and was slightly faster. In the fire's last hour, he looked at his hand. The webbing between his fingers had thickened, not dramatically, not yet the grotesque revision that was coming, but enough, a millimeter, perhaps two, of new tissue connecting index finger to middle finger, translucent and faintly veined, with something that pulsed the color of bioluminescence seen through deep water. He pressed it with his thumbnail. He felt the pressure everywhere, in his jaw, behind his eyes, in the new geography of his palate, that his tongue kept finding and retreating from. He did not wake the other monks. He was, in some sense, he could not yet articulate, protecting them. In another sense, a sense that would become dominant, he was simply not finished yet. An interruption felt wasteful. He pressed the stone harder against his chest. It sank, slightly, into the skin there. He let it. Chapter 3. The forest moves for him. By the third day, he no longer needed the road. He moved through the forest like water finding downhill, not running, not quite walking, pulled by some orientation that preceded instinct and had no name in any language he had studied. The stone had stopped being separate from his body sometime in the second night. He understood this as one understands weather, not as knowledge, but as skin knowledge, the kind older than language, older than the particular biology that had produced language. It sat now in the cavity of his chest, nested against the left side of his sternum, and when he breathed deeply, he could feel it rotating. Slowly, with purpose. He was not in pain. This was the most frightening thing, and he was no longer frightened. The trees opened for him without wind. Branches that should have caught his robe parted. He left no footprints in the soft mud of the forest floor, which he noticed without particular concern. His shadow, when the afternoon light found him in a clearing, was wrong, cast at an angle inconsistent with the sun, shaped at its edges like something that had more limbs than he currently presented. A samurai found him at the forest's edge. Chapter 4. Lord Akaishi's Man. His name was Gotoshinji, and he had served Lord Akaishi for 11 years without flinching at anything the province had offered him to flinch at. He had put down a peasant revolt in the northern rice fields, had hunted a murderer through winter mountains for 3 weeks without shelter, had once stood in a burning building to retrieve his lord's seal, because retreat had not occurred to him as an option. His face was a topographic record of survived violence, a map of cuts and burns arranged over bone structure that suggested he had been carved from something that didn't bleed easily. He had his hand on the tsuka before he'd consciously registered what he was seeing. The body of the monk at the tree line was standing wrong, not dramatically, just fractionally wrong. The geometry of weight distribution suggesting a relationship to gravity that had been quietly renegotiated. The robe was intact, but the hands were wrong. The neck was wrong. The shadows around the figure were proliferating in ways that afternoon light did not produce. The face he could not look at directly, not because it was monstrous, not yet, but because looking at it directly produced a sensation behind his eyes, like two thoughts trying to occupy this same space. Oni, go to breathe. Not accusation, a resignation, the word for what exists when explanation has been exhausted. The thing that wore Tetsuya's face turned toward him with a smoothness that had no joints in it. Tetsuya tried to say, "I am not." His mouth formed the shapes. What came out was layered. His voice, recognizable in its timbre, in its educated cadences, carrying beneath it something that had never needed a mouth before. A frequency rather than a sound, structured like language and operating below language, communicating in the register that loosened Goto's teeth in their sockets and sent thin trickles of blood from both his nostrils and made the horse, tied 30 meters back at the roadside, scream once and then fall terribly silent. Goto drew. The motion was perfect, the product of 11 years of daily practice, the clean geometry of a man who had made his body a precision instrument. The blade caught the afternoon light and threw it sideways. The stroke was true. It should have opened Tetsuya from hip to shoulder. What Goto's blade met was not flesh anymore, not entirely. The resistance was wrong, too dense in some places and absent in others, like cutting through something in the process of becoming something else. The blade passed through and the wound it left did not bleed red. It wept a fluid that was faintly luminescent and smelled of deep ocean water and electrical discharge, and it closed as Goto watched, the edges drawing together with purposeful muscularity, like a mouth completing a thought. Tetsuya's hand. The thing Tetsuya's hand was becoming, moved once. Goto Shinji, 11 years of survived violence, did not survive this. What reached him was not a blow. It was more like an adjustment, a correction of his architecture. He had time to understand that the thing touching him was interested in him, specifically, professionally interested, before the interest became structural and the accounting began. He did not scream. He was, to his credit, not that kind of man. What he became, in the next 30 seconds, was something that would have agreed with him about that. Chapter 5. The Village of Muraseki. This is where the histories go quiet. The village of Muraseki burned in the autumn of that year, during the hour of the dog, when the darkness has fully committed and the fires that are lit against it become the only geography, witnessed from neighboring valleys. Farmers, mostly men, whose relationship with the supernatural was practical rather than theological, described lights descending from the sky above the valley. Not fire, not lightning, cold light, white blue and geometrically precise, falling in columns as though the sky had been divided into architectural sections, and each section was being serviced in turn. They described the sound, a bell sustained beneath all other sound, as though the valley itself had been struck and was still ringing, would always be ringing, had perhaps always been ringing, and they were only now capable of hearing it. They described shapes at the forest's edge. They used the word yokai because the word yokai had been invented specifically to avoid describing such shapes precisely, to give the mind a container that it could set down and walk away from. The shogunate dispatched 40 men in 3 formations. They were not unprepared for supernatural engagement. The province had a history and the detachment included 2 onmyoji, court diviners trained in the identification and neutralization of malevolent presences. These were not credulous men. These were specialists. 14 returned. They could not agree on what they had encountered, which was itself the most coherent testimony they offered. The divergentia of their accounts, suggesting that whatever they had seen had presented differently to different minds, finding the particular shape most suited to each observer's deepest structural horror. But one detail was consistent. Every one of the 14 confirmed it, independently, before any could have compared notes. The thing at the center of the burning village had been wearing a monk's robe, and it had been sorting the dead, not consuming them, not in any predatory sense the soldiers could interpret. Sorting them, moving between the fallen, with systematic attention, applying some method of assessment that the survivors could not parse, but could feel the logic of, the way one feels the logic of a foreign language without understanding a single word. The onmyoji, who made it back, submitted a joint report to the shogunate that was classified and sealed in the one paragraph that survives in fragmentary form, copied by a later archivist who clearly did not understand what he was transcribing. The diviners wrote, "It is not consuming them, it is completing them. We cannot tell you what they are being completed toward, or for whom. We do not have the correct instruments. We suspect the correct instruments do not yet exist." Chapter 6. The Freighter Murasaki. 731 years later. The freighter Murasaki dropped out of slide space at 0340 ship time into a system that wasn't in the navigation database, orbiting a moon that therefore did not exist, and Captain Hana Akaishi stood at the main viewport and felt her back teeth ache. The ache was specific, not the jaw tension of stress or the phantom pain of the ceramic molar she'd had replaced at Titan Station, but a resonant vibration, as though her teeth were being used as antennae for a frequency that had been broadcasting for a very long time and was only now finding a receiver close enough. The moon below was dark and roughly ovoid, its surface a uniform matter that absorbed light without reflection. No atmosphere on the sensors, no thermal variation, nothing that should have been interesting. It was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. "Engineering," she said. "I need a source on this stone." "Working on it, Captain." Chief Engineer Vasquez, 16 years of freighter work, sounded genuinely puzzled, which was notable because Vasquez had a professional relationship with puzzlement that kept it at arm's length. "Hull resonance checks out. Drive systems nominal. It's not us." "Then it's external. What is the source?" A pause. The kind of pause that contains a conclusion someone is reluctant to deliver. "The moon, Captain. It's coming from the moon." Hana turned from the viewport. Her sensor operator, Tetsu, was standing at his console with his palm pressed flat against the display surface, not operating it, not running queries or adjusting parameters, just pressing. His eyes were closed. His face held an expression of intense, interior listening. The readouts beneath his hand were cycling through configurations the system shouldn't have been capable of displaying. Not malfunctions. The data was structured, was meaningful, was cycling through what looked like an inventory, a very long inventory, assessed and organized by criteria. The ship's A flagged as unrecognized and then stopped flagging, quietly, as though it had decided recognition wasn't its responsibility here. Tetsu. He opened his eyes. They were fine. Brown, clear, the same unremarkable eyes he'd had when he came aboard at Ganymede Station 3 months ago, without references she could fully verify, and with a manner of quiet competence that had made her overlook the gaps. He removed his hand from the console. The readouts returned to normal. "There's something down there," he said. His voice was measured, informational. "It's been waiting." "For what?" He looked at her. The look lasted slightly too long. Not threatening, not evasive, but calibrating, as though he was determining how much of an answer she was currently equipped to process. "To finish sorting," he said. Hannah held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she went to her locked specimen drawer, the one she never opened aboard ship, the one her grandmother had pressed the contents into her hands and said, "Do not let it touch the ground. Do not let it touch the ground, Hannah," as though the repetition would make the instruction survivable. The drawer was warm. The lock had already disengaged. Inside, the stone, dark, smooth, carved with marks that were not quite wounds, or perhaps exactly wounds, was rotating slowly in its cradle, oriented towards the moon below, humming faintly, with a particular warmth of held breath. She closed the drawer. "Suit up the descent team," she said. "Full tactical load. I want Daisuke on point." Chapter 7. Daisuke. Mercenary Daisuke. Ex-JAG Special Operations. 12 years of hostile environment contracts across 7 moons and 2 asteroid installations. Recipient of the Jovian authorities' commendation for valor, which he kept in a drawer because displaying it felt like advertising. Was not a man who experienced presentiment. He experienced data. He experienced threat assessment. He experienced the specific mathematics of survival that 11 years of close contact violence had compiled into something that operated below conscious thought and was faster than fear. What he experienced in the suit up bay, loading his sidearm and checking the cells on his AVA unit, was not presentiment. It was data. Specifically, the data of the other 3 team members' faces as they suited up, the way each of them kept not looking at the viewport that showed the moon below, the way the ship's ambient tone had settled into the hull, like something that had always been there and was only now making itself known, the way Captain Akaishi stood in the bay doorway and watched them prepare with an expression he had seen on clients before, the specific expression of someone who knows more than they're disclosing and has made a calculation about what disclosure costs. He checked his blade. Carbon ceramic, practical, in zero-pressure environments where projectile weapons created their own complications, and said nothing. The descent pod separated from the Muraseki at 0412 and reached the surface at 0431. The structure was 3 kilometers beneath it. Chapter 8. The Structure. The tunnel entrance was not excavated. This was the first thing Daisuke's assessment noted. The walls were not cut, or bored, or blasted. They were grown, the same dark stone as the viewport and the specimen drawer's contents, and the ache in the captain's jaw, grown in configurations that were architectural without being constructed, the way chorale is architectural without intention. Except this had intention. The intention was evident in the way the tunnel's geometry shifted as they descended, always maintaining proportions that kept the descent team slightly off balance, slightly uncertain of scale, producing a persistent mild vertigo that Daisuke recognized as deliberate. Environmental manipulation, psychological preparation of the visitor or the prey. He kept this assessment to himself and kept moving. The temperature increased with depth in the wrong way, not the geothermal gradient they'd have expected, but a biological warmth, a warmth with humidity, a warmth that smelled of ozone and the deep ocean and something else, something metabolic, something that had been breathing down here for a long time. The tone was louder here, not painful, not yet, but present in the skeleton. Daisuke could feel it in his femurs, his jaw, the plates of his skull. Tetsu was at the rear of the formation, and Daisuke did not like that, and kept not turning to check on him, because turning would reveal how much he did not like it. The tunnel opened into the forced chamber without warning. Chapter 9. The Sorting. Daisuke stopped. The chamber was roughly 40 meters in diameter, its ceiling lost in darkness that the sweet lights couldn't fully penetrate. The walls were lined, not shelved, not racked, but grown into, integrated at the architectural level, with alcoves. And the alcoves were occupied. The shapes in the alcoves were still alive. This was not immediately evident, and then it was devastatingly evident. A movement in the periphery, then another, then the terrible cumulative revelation of dozens of simultaneous slow movements, the hydraulic patience of things that had accepted their new architecture and were operating within it. They had been human. The raw material were evident. The basic structural vocabulary of bodies, 2 arms and 2 legs, and a head, a torso, a spine. But the vocabulary had been added to extensively by something working from a different grammar, new limbs, not grafted but grown, seamlessly, from the original biology, extended from torsos at angles that suggested a different understanding of what a body was for. Heads bore additional sensory apparatus, complex and wet and faintly luminescent, that tracked the descent team's movement with the calm professionalism of instruments doing their job. Torsos had been opened and reorganized. Viscera resituated. Skeletal structure reoriented. The whole interior architecture revised towards some purpose that Daisuke could not identify, because he did not have the correct frame of reference. But they were alive. They breathed, or performed the function that breathing served, in slow, synchronized cycles. Where faces remained, they held expression not of agony or of madness, but of concentration, the deep, exclusive concentration of people in the middle of something that requires everything. Team Medic Seo made a sound that she would never afterward be able to describe or reproduce. Back, Daisuke said. The word came from the same place his body went to in the moment before violence. Not thought, not quite instinct. The third thing, nobody moved. In the alcoves, the sorted things continued their patient work. Daisuke could see now what the work was. The slow self-modification continuing in real time, each figure adding incrementally to its own revision. The alterations guided by some distributed intelligence that moved through the chamber like a current. He watched a figure in the nearest alcove extend a new structure from its left forearm, not with pain, with a calm application of internal pressure, and oriented towards the ceiling, where it interfaced with the wall growth and completed the circuit, and somewhere deep in the structure's lower levels, something large powered up another increment. This is what they're for, biological power generation, for something beneath us that requires enormous energy over enormous time. He had his carbine up before the thought fully formed. "Captain," he said into the comm, "we need to..." The tone changed. Chapter 10. The Return of the Accounting. In the lowest chamber, below the first, below a second he hadn't reached, below a third that his sensors suggested existed but couldn't fully map. Something registered that the inventory had been checked and the outstanding items had arrived. 731 years was, in the relevant accounting, not very long. The work proceeded at the pace the work required. The biology of this particular planet had proven usefully complex, adaptable, various, capable of significant revision without losing the fundamental architecture that made it valuable. The sorting had been proceeding well. These new arrivals were interesting. The thing that had been Tetsuya was Tetsuya, in the sense that Tetsuya's original material remained present, substantially revised, moved through the lower chamber with the efficiency of something that had not hurried in 7 centuries and did not intend to start. It felt the arrivals above it the way it felt the stone in the captain's drawer. As signal, as confirmation, as the satisfying sense of a system functioning as designed. The captain's bloodline had been flagged at initial contact. This was standard practice. Mark the useful vectors, the biological configurations that demonstrated particular compatibility with the revision process, and seed them forward through generational time. It required patience. The work always required patience. The stone in her drawer had been warming for 31 years, since the grandmother's hands. The grandmother had been close, had almost been sorted, would have made a fine addition to the lower chambers. But the timing hadn't aligned. You could not rush the accounting. Her granddaughter had better architecture anyway. Chapter 11. The Last Things Daisuke saw. The stone came through the deck of the descent pod. Later, much later, the Murasaki's AI would record the event as hull breach, cause unknown, because the cause was not in its reference vocabulary, and it moved through the pod's interior and through the tunnel system and into the first chamber with the specific, unhurried velocity of something that has arrived at its destination. It found Captain Akaishi the way water finds the lowest point, not dramatically, with the logic of things, that were always going to happen. She had 12 seconds in which she understood what her grandmother had been trying to prevent and why the instruction had been do not let it touch the ground, rather than destroy it, because you could not destroy it, because it was not the kind of thing that destruction applied to. Then the stone touched her sternum. Then the hunger started. Daisuke saw this. He also saw Tetsu behind him, who was no longer pretending, whose architecture had begun the visible portion of its revision. The new structures extending with that same calm hydraulic patience, the face reorganizing itself around sensory apparatus that could process this environment properly, the eyes filming over with a bioluminescent membrane that allowed clear sight in the lower chambers. Tetsu looked at him. The look was not unkind, professional, assessing. Your skeletal density is excellent, Tetsu said, in a voice that was layered now, the familiar one, and the frequency beneath it. And your reflexes suggest a nervous system with high revision tolerance. Daisuke fired 3 times. The carbon ceramic rounds passed through Tetsu's revised torso, and Tetsu noted this, the way one notes an interruption, and continued. You'll be placed in a primary alcove, Tetsu said. The work will take approximately 4 years. You won't find it unpleasant. Daisuke's last coherent act was to put the blade between himself and whatever reached for him next. It bought him 6 seconds. He spent them counting the alcoves he could see, running the mathematics of the team, running the mathematics of the ship's crew, running the mathematics of the reporting lag to JAC Central and what would arrive in response and how long it would take. The mathematics did not produce a satisfying result. The reaching thing was gentle, which was worse. What Daisuke became in the chambers below was very useful. He would have agreed, if agreement had remained available to him, that at least he was still, in some reconstructed sense, functional. His skeletal density was, in fact, excellent. Aboard the Muraseki, the AA logged the crew as present and operational. Their bow signs read as stable. The ship maintained orbit. The stone rotated in its new configuration at the captain's sternum, warm and purposeful, pulsing in time with something that was not quite her heartbeat, but was learning. In the lower chambers, the work continued. In the alcoves, the sorted things breathed their slow, synchronized breath and added to themselves with the patience of 7 centuries, and thought, insofar as they thought, of completion, somewhere below all of it, the thing that had begun as a monk on a muddy road in feudal Japan oriented toward the stars with all of its revised sensory apparatus, and felt, with the deep satisfaction of a system functioning as designed, that the harvest was proceeding, that the accounting would balance, that the work, as the work always did, continued. Kegare, in the oldest texts, older than the ones preserved, older than the ones burned. The word does not mean impurity. It means in process. It means not yet complete. It means wait. Crystal chasm. The descent into the Kegare is complete, but the abyss never truly closes. Thank you for taking part in this descent. If you wish to follow, our further exploration into the dark, subscribe to the channel. Your presence in the void is appreciated.